Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Today's topic is investing in CEA with confidence. We're going to be talking about a few key areas of review. And I have a wonderful guest here with me, Chris Raleigh from Harvest Returns. We have a lot of content to cover today, so let's give everyone maybe a minute to join. I'm seeing attendees funneling in, and then we'll get started. So once again, the topic we'll be discussing today is investing in CEA with confidence. I have Chris Raleigh with me here. I'm going to quickly jump forward and I'll introduce myself. I'd love for Chris to introduce himself. I'll do kind of a brief bio and then we'll get started. So my name is Djavid Amidi-Abraham. I am the Director of Consulting at Agritecture. I've been with the company for about 7.5 years and served as our Director of Consulting for the past 3. Prior to that, I have worked in the cannabis industry as well as had roles in various ag tech companies, specifically related to direct air capture tools for greenhouse CO2 supply. Chris, would you like to give a quick intro?
Thanks, Djavid. Yeah, Chris Raleigh. I'm the CEO, founder of Harvest Returns. We're a company that invests in agriculture, including, of course, CEA. I'll go into a little bit more about my company, but my background in a nutshell is a combination of military and tech and investments and real estate, and then ended up in ag investment and been doing that for nearly 10 years now. So thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Chris. So the way that we're going to run things today is I'm going to kind of dive into some content around what we call our due diligence services. This is essentially a sort of an auditing service for CEA operations. And what we've learned after doing this time and time again is there are a lot of common mistakes in the industry. So what we want to do is really equip the audience today with an understanding of things to look for when they're assessing CEA operations, what kind of pitfalls we see, as well as what areas to pay special attention to when you're looking at CEA. So without further ado, I would really like to kind of dive into the content so we have enough time for everyone. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to give our section, which will be about 25-30 minutes. Chris is going to dive in with a presentation on Harvest Returns and what they're up to. And then at the end, we're going to save about 5 to 10 minutes for questions as well. So if you have any questions, please save them for the end, and we'll have some time to answer them there. So CEA is somewhat of a rapidly growing segment in the farming industry. A lot of these companies, are responding to rising demand from local food. So instead of a lot of products being grown in traditional ag regions and shipped around the country, we're seeing rising demand for localized food systems and the products coming from them. So vertical farms, greenhouses are all seeing much more capital investment than they had in the past. And there's new technologies that are enabling those businesses to have attractive unit economics and attract that investment as well. This is really just the beginning, or we see it as the beginning of a transition for the way certain crop categories are grown, especially leafy greens. And success in this space will hopefully lead to a more sustainable future for agriculture as we see these businesses become more efficient and respond better to market needs. So looking at our own CEA census, we can see there have been some challenges in the industry. 78% of CEA developers who attempted to raise capital were unable to rely on traditional sources. So traditional sources, the focus there shifted more towards venture capital, which caused a lot of problems for some of the farms. And I think recently we've seen a lot of that capital be pulled back because of, various metrics that were not met by some of these companies. So that is kind of creating a bit of a trough of what we call the trough of disillusionment. It's a challenging period for CEA. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that a lot of people who are involved in this industry are coming from other industries. They don't understand agriculture as fully and holistically as traditional farmers do. So our own census has indicated that 49% of new CEA developers have no prior experience in agriculture, which is why companies like ours are often brought in to assess these operations, because you have to look at things from an agricultural lens in order to be successful building an agriculture business. And also an interesting kind of fact from our census was that 73% of CEA developers would choose different equipment, tech, or crops. So they're realizing that maybe they didn't make the best decisions on the outset and would like to go back and maybe spend that capital a bit differently. Unfortunately, not everyone has the opportunity to do that, and that becomes problematic when it comes down to meeting investor goals. So investing in confidence with confidence really means knowing where to look. And so in our due diligence process, we really go through 6 separate categories of assessment. We look at cultivation technology. This is ultimately, what is the cultivation system being used? Is it really providing an advantage to their operation? And oftentimes we have to answer the question, is it worth building, or is it worth looking at off-the-shelf options? And that's a very difficult question to answer without really looking at the details and nuances of a operation. But I'll just say there are a lot of very viable technologies on the market that can effectively grow and produce these types of CEA products at attractive unit economics. So that is a question we're often tasked with answering. Additionally, commercial strategy. Is the company growing the right products for the right markets? Are they distributing into the right market segments? This is a very important question to answer. It influences lots of aspects of operations, from where your sales team is going to also how you're packaging, and that ultimately influences your unit economics as well. So commercial strategy is very important. Understanding the level of saturation that you can kind of influence in your target markets is very important, as well as growing niche products. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Economic feasibility. Ultimately, this is the core of any business. You want to be, producing in a way that makes the business money and meets your investors' goals. So what we often will develop parallel economic models to a lot of these operations in order to kind of see where they are, how close they are to theoretical maximums in terms of yield rates and other performance metrics. Additionally, management team is really important. Is the current team well equipped to execute on the stated objectives? And this goes down to a lot of different facets of successful production. Everything from your cultivation team to your marketing team to your sales team to your management team are very important. And we see a lot of these CEA operations pulling in people from other industries. And while that can be beneficial in some ways, there are some inherent realities to agriculture that don't always translate well for individuals that are not used to agricultural systems. Additionally, competitive advantage is really important to consider as well. How does this operation fare against traditional sources of competition, which is field-grown product? Field-grown product is very cheap, often has an expensive distribution footprint, but the core cost of production for field-grown product is very cheap and something that's very difficult to compete with in a lot of areas. Additionally, we're seeing competition between greenhouses and vertical farms in some markets, and kind of a reticence to invest in certain markets because of the pre-existing nature of some of these CEA systems. So that is also a source of competition that we assess, and we recommend people looking at CEA operations to assess as well. Finally, sustainability is also a very important category to look at. Now, this is, not all folks who are investing are interested in the sustainability aspects of these operations, but we are seeing that as a conversation topic that's becoming more and more important. A lot of CEA companies are touting, 95% less water use, 90% less fertilizer use, lots of other, sustainable advantages, but a lot of them conveniently leave out the carbon footprint conversation. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later during this conversation as well. So let's dive right into it. Cultivation technology. It lies at the center of many strategies in modern CEAs. Many companies we've looked at are proposing novel cultivation technologies. And what we often see is that performance is not that much better, or sometimes even worse than systems off the shelf. A lot of the motivator for companies developing these kind of novel cultivation systems is lower capex. I hear this time and time again. Like, yeah, we looked at systems available on the market, but they're very expensive, and we think we can do it cheaper. So that can be a reality, but oftentimes R&D is very expensive. Timelines to developing these technologies are often longer than expected. And I think a lot of companies, as was indicated by our CEA census, would choose their technology differently. And I imagine that there are some of those CEA technology companies that have recently closed up shop, wishing that they had gone with an off-the-shelf rather than internally developed CEA systems. CEA is not a new technology. It has been developed in other markets to very extensive lengths. Prior to the Japanese development of vertical farms in the 1990s and in early 2000s, we saw the Dutch pioneer greenhouse technologies. And so there are very advanced greenhouse and vertical farm technologies available in both of those markets. But we're still seeing a lot of novel development. So one of the key questions about novel development cultivation technologies are they ready to be deployed at commercial scale? We often see companies seeking investment, but their technology is pretty early stage, and we make investors aware of that. But it's also important to look at that from the lens of how can these systems be integrated with existing automation and mechanization systems. That's really important because that's going to be key to scalability. Novel systems with unique tray types or unique geometries or unique crop orientations are not going to fit well with off-the-shelf automation systems for harvesting, washing, packaging, etc. So it's really important to go into R&D with that in mind. And ultimately, I hear this time and time again that this company has a very competent engineering team. They'll be able to figure it out. That type of wand waving does not work out well. We see it time and time again that those kind of development timelines get extended. There's always challenges to engineering custom systems that are designed after or designed for custom cultivation systems. And it's really important to look at how those are going to integrate with existing automation systems. So that's just kind of a word of caution and something that we think is really important to look at when investing in novel cultivation technologies. Additionally, what is the market history and how reliable are yield claims? The longer this company has been growing and the larger their data set is, the more reliable those yield claims are. We've seen in the past, snapshots of data that are taken during a couple of months of the year, but they, and they may be favorable, but those couple of months were very favorable times of year to be growing that product. So it's really important to have a long market history for some of these products. I would say at least a year for novel cultivation systems, sometimes longer. One grow cycle is simply not enough of a sample space to make accurate claims on. So we always recommend trialing these novel systems for longer in order to have a more reliable data set. Additionally, it's really important to track the right metrics: planting density, site yield weight, grow cycle times, and how is the quality and yield consistency on record. Quality and yield are very important factors when it comes to selling in bulk. A lot of buyers will not accept products that are lower in quality than what they're used to. So it's really important to pay attention to that and have experts on your team that know how to not only assess, but also improve quality to a point where it is acceptable by large volume buyers. Additionally, we see a lot of companies entering the space with what we call the identity crisis. They're tech/farming companies that are developing novel cultivation systems, but also developing farms. And the challenge here is that capital sources for those two types of companies are very different. Those two types of companies have different goals and maturation rates and investor expectations. Farming is typically a slow growth process, whereas tech is expected to be very fast and iterative and saturate market opportunity very quickly. So we see a lot of companies building farms to prove the efficacy of their tech, but those farm builds are slower than their tech investors were expecting. So it's really important to look at the right types of capital. And even if you have a technology that you're planning on going to market with, either through licensing or through use in your own farms, you need to really make your investors aware that this is at core a farming company. And if not, then maybe partner with farms that could use your technology so that you are not taking on the responsibility of that farm building process. Building a farm building technology have different types of expertise in terms of management teams, and it's quite challenging to do both simultaneously. And we don't see a lot of success in the space with companies that are attempting to do that. Commercial strategy is also very, very important. Commercial strategy is focused around a really good fit between the product being grown and the proposed offtake strategy. There are lots of instances that we've seen where a company will be growing a product and suggesting that they distribute it through a very small distribution channel. There isn't a lot of, I guess, work done to understand the total market saturation potential of those markets. Or there's just a lot of wand waving going on about, oh yeah, if we grow it, it'll be sold. It's a higher quality product. Our samples have been, very well received. I think microgreens are a really great example of this. Microgreens are a relatively niche product. There isn't a whole lot of volume demand for these products. And it's challenging to distribute a niche product that doesn't have a strong market demand yet. Building out market segments is never a good formula for rapid distribution rates. And so niche products need to be paired with niche market offtake opportunities. And I think that mismatch between products and offtake channels is something that we see very commonly in the industry. Additionally, matching those distribution channels with the correct distribution costs is very important as well. A small bag that you can use to package cut and clamshell leafy greens that would be distributed at a farmer's market is not the same cost as an actual clamshell that you'd need to distribute through Whole Foods. So you need to account for all of those things when you're developing an offtake strategy and selecting crops as well. The proposed approach, you need to make sure that the market opportunity is there. You need to work backwards from the market opportunity into deciding what crops to grow and how to distribute. If you do it the other way around, it tends to be problematic, and you'll find yourself in a situation where you have a farm built in a place that doesn't really want what you're growing. So it's really important to move backwards from market opportunity. And additionally, this goes back to the cultivation system. How scalable is the cultivation technology? Are you going to be able to meet the market demand for these products in a reasonable time frame based on how complicated the cultivation technology is and how how well it works with available automation and mechanization systems? So some key red flags that we see in this area are, does the proposed offtake route make sense for the crop and proposed volumes? Once again, herbs are relatively lower volume than cut and clamshell leafy greens. We eat a lot more salads than we eat pestos just as a society. So it's really important to consider those volumes when you're building your farm, as well as choosing your offtake opportunity. And it's really important to remember as well that consumers don't often care about the technology. They want a better product. When it comes to marketing and packaging and labeling your product, it's good to include, sustainable, CEA grown, locally grown, pesticide free, but ultimately you need to have a better product as well. And that's going to go a long way with your commercial strategy, especially when it comes to higher volume sales and you're sampling out products to buyers like Whole Foods, Costco, Walmart, et cetera. So economic feasibility is kind of the core of any business, and especially CEA businesses. What we're seeing a lot of these days is, very dreamy scenarios with rapid market saturation, with newer products treated similarly to a static established product type. So people expecting their herb sales to increase as fast as their leafy greens, cut and clamshell leafy green sales. That's simply not a reality. Time and time again, we see that there is higher demand for certain product categories, and that's mostly related to what people eat more. We like to see sensible market product matches. And I know I keep going back to that, but it's a really important consideration, especially when you're growing in a CEA system. CEA is expensive. Your costs of production are much higher than field grown. You're using a lot of energy, you're using a lot of labor to grow these products, and you really can't have high levels of wastage if you want a successful CEA business. So making sure that your wastage is low and your off-takers are taking the product very quickly and you don't have stuff sitting around in your fridge is very, very important. So key questions we like to ask is, what is the plan for long and near-term labor reduction? When it comes to economic feasibility of CEA, labor reduction is the number one thing to consider. It's really important to make sure your labor numbers are dropping. You have a plan for that for the future. You really need to also be tracking your unit costs of production. We see a lot of inaccuracy in how this is done, and that is problematic because it leads to unknown costs in the future. So it's really important to be aware of what goes into these costs and be tracking those very carefully. Who are your main off-takers and what are they paying for your product? That's really important. It goes back to the product market fit. Curb those expectations for rapid market growth with niche products. That goes back to the microgreens and the herbs. If that is your main product, you need to be looking for market segments that are probably not buying nearly in the volume that you would be selling leafy greens for. Another question we like to ask is, how many farms have been built so far and how quickly can farms be deployed? And this goes back to the cultivation technologies and how complicated it is to build and mechanize these systems. With companies that have off-the-shelf offerings, they can be shipped to the location and deployed relatively quickly, whereas novel cultivation systems usually take longer. So while they may have an advantage in per unit yield or quality of the product, it's really important to consider how quickly they can be deployed, because there's a lot of companies in this space now, and they're starting to occupy the shelf space that's available for local products. All right, going into the management team. This is really important because this is the team that runs the company, and they're largely going to be responsible for a lot of the decisions that go into building and operating these farms. It's really important to look for work histories with similar types of businesses. I know there aren't a lot of CEA businesses in the past, but traditional farms are great labor pools to draw from. People that understand lettuce very well tend to do well in this industry. So we see more of a I see a beneficial pairing with people that have experience growing the crops rather than people that have experience with those particular systems. Technologies can be learned, but learning how a crop grows and how to grow it for commercial sale requires a lot of experience and deep understanding. So we see that as a more valuable skill set than somebody understanding the technology very thoroughly. Are there individuals with food industry background? That's a really important question, and specifically background in selling similar products. We're calling them products because ultimately in CEA, you need to differentiate the product from other leafy greens on the shelf. You're going to do that through branding. You're going to do that through attractive marketing. You're going to do that through language that's on the product itself. But ultimately, this is a product. It's not necessarily just a punnet of leafy greens. This is a unique premium product, and it needs to be sold by people who understand how to do that and how to market it and sell it that way. So that's a really important thing to draw experience from individuals that have backgrounds in that type of product development. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of these farms put their products into salad kits. You know, that is a product development activity. So we're no longer just selling, you know, just the leafy greens. There's also other components there, and knowing how to build and market those products is really important in differentiating your product from the others on the shelf that are very likely could be cheaper because they're grown in other settings such as outdoor field farms. Once again, how relevant is the head grower's background to the products being grown? Once again, this goes back to being more familiar with the crop than the system. We often get asked, you know, if the head grower has worked in a greenhouse growing the same lettuce type, will they be able to perform in a vertical farm? Oftentimes, if they have very proven experience in a greenhouse, that translates well to vertical farms. We don't see a whole lot of issues with head growers that have greenhouse experience going to vertical farms. It's a bit more of an issue when they have no experience with CEA and they're coming from a field position. But if they have experience with those crops, and commercializing and selling those crops, then that's very beneficial. And I would say, once again, it's more important to have experience with the crops and products than it is with the technology. So additionally, decision makers in technology development, having past experience in agriculture is important. I would say it's less important than the sellers and the growers of the product. And then ultimately, your brand development and marketing team should be knowledgeable in growing, or producing differentiated products for these newer markets. It's really important to differentiate and sell these products because, once again, CEA grown product is expensive, and it's important to make sure your wastage is low. All right, so going into some competitive advantage points. Going back to differentiators, how is it grown, branded? This is something that's going to set you apart in the market from not only other CEA companies, but other field grown products. The main differentiators we see are, you know, pesticide free, locally grown, uses less water, less fertilizer. But what's often ignored is the carbon conversation. That is a negative differentiator, I would see, for a lot of CEA operations, but it's becoming more and more important and coming a more kind of frontline topic of conversation. How does economic performance compare to others? You know, this is kind of a hard thing to judge. There isn't a lot of publicly information about economic performance of other CEA operations, but there is a lot of publicly available information on field farming operations. So I think that is a good metric to compare against. Ultimately, a lot of CEA operations will not even be able to come near those unit economics, but it is kind of the holy grail. And if you can show investors you have a pathway to meeting those costs of production, that is a very attractive thing to present. So, you know, there are some publicly available resources on CEA, and I would encourage everyone to track their economic performance and make sure you're benchmarking that against others in the market. Additionally, yield rates are not all that matters. You need a better quality, you need better consistency, and that needs to happen harvest after harvest. When you have volume buyers, they become very particular about the quality, and that is something that's important to keep to. So yield rates are not all that matters. There are other factors that come into play if you are to maintain a competitive advantage. Additionally, scalability potential is important to consider. Once again, novel technologies are probably not going to scale as quickly as incumbent technologies that have many iterations in the market, long market histories, more established supply chains to deliver the raw materials more quickly, and contractors in the field that are ready to basically take those materials and build a CEA system out of them. When you have bespoke systems, when you have custom engineering, when you have immature supply chains, that essentially leads to delays, and that can be a negative impact on competitive advantage in terms of scalability. And then finally, sustainability is a really important and growing in importance. What I said before, about the carbon footprint is really important to consider. What we see time and time again is that CEA systems have multiples the carbon footprint of field-grown products, even when you're considering the carbon footprint of transport. You get about to ship a pound of lettuce from California to New York. It's about 1/3 of a pound of CO2 per pound of product that's moved. But to grow a pound of lettuce in New York, it's about 6 pounds of CO2 if you're relying on a grid powered or a grid power source. So sustainability claims are, I think, a little bit cherry picked in this industry, but we are seeing solid steps made by CEA operations to decarbonize their footprint, buying from wind power sources, co-locating with solar farms, and just generally making steps through microgrid integration and others to decarbonize, because it is an important aspect of CEA in becoming more sustainable. Additionally, looking at plans for future sustainable operations is really important. We like to assess those and look at those very carefully to make sure they make sense given the crop type and as well as the region that it's being grown in. So cheaper energy is not necessarily more clean. We see the shift to cogeneration as something that large CEA operations often do. Burning gas is not necessarily more carbon efficient than drawing electricity from the grid, especially burning gas at relatively small scales like that. So then the conversation around trigen comes in. It's like, well, if you're using your carbon dioxide to feed your plants, isn't that getting rid of the carbon dioxide? And the answer is no. Because carbon dioxide stored in a soft biomass like leafy greens is not stored forever. It's not stored nearly as well as if that gas was still in the ground. So there are some really nuanced considerations to take into account there when it comes to cogen or trigen, which is often the next step for a lot of large CEA operations. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at CEA operations. And with sustainability, that concludes kind of our 6-step process for looking at various CEA operations. Of course, I didn't get into every nuanced detail here, but thank you all for your attention. We're going to be shifting over to Chris and his presentation around harvest returns. And once again, we'll have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any questions. So thank you all very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions at the end.
Hey, thanks, Djavid. This is presentation is kind of based on our experience over the past 5 years or so investing in controlled environment agriculture. Djavid covered a lot of ground there. I'm going to try not to reiterate any of it in our talking points. Most of these are based on our actual experience with investments. I will say, we're a firm believer in what Agritecture does. We partner with them so that as companies come through their process and have some experience and have a strong review and go through their due diligence and their consulting process before they come to us. That way, a lot of the risk there's a lot of the risk is reduced when we see these deals. And I wish we would have had that partnership, 4 or 5 years ago when we invested in some of these first farms. So all the pictures you're going to see throughout this presentation are in farms that we've invested in. Next slide, please. A little bit about our company. First, we were founded in 2016. I think our first CEA investment was made in 2019. We've got a pool of investors. These are all investors that invest small amounts, small check sizes in these deals, anywhere between 10,000 to 100,000, low 6-figure sorts of things. We pull the money together and then we invest in the farms. We've done 50 raises. Of those, about 20% have been on the CEA side. Besides doing CEA, we do sustainable livestock and some specialty crops. And also we have sort of a venture side where we're in early stage ag tech companies. And, our goal is to make investors money while sustaining the environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what we've done. It kind of runs the gamut of CEA, 10 different deals here. ranging from very large scale greenhouse operations to very localized urban farms. And we consider recirculating aquaculture systems as CEA. Some people don't, but we see probably more similarities there between doing it in a controlled climate versus doing it outside than otherwise. And then we've done some sort of specialty things here. The thing to note about all these, they're all still fortunately in business. We haven't had any bankruptcies. A couple of the smaller farms I'll get into, size and why that's important. And when you're evaluating investment opportunity, while you look at, the scale, and that's important. And you'll notice, some of these check sizes, the average checks is about 520,000, as you'll see. In those larger scale, those were, multi-million-dollar projects, $20-30 million projects, where we were just a small equity component to either first money or sort of bridge money to get the project complete. And you'll note here that we've had one exit, and that exit was actually a financial exit. That project's still being developed. So we're fortunate to be able to exit that, even though it did not result or hasn't resulted yet in producing actual vegetables yet. Next slide. Okay, so this is why we still like this space, despite some hiccups we've seen in it in the past couple of years. Not going to go into sustainability. Djavid did a great job of covering that. Building more robust and resilient food systems. We saw a lot of supply chain disruptions during COVID. We hear a lot about food deserts on some of these urban farms. So putting producing food closer to where it's consumed, we think is very important. The other thing we like that we are seeing more and more of is those labor savings, automation. I'll get into some of the details on that. Next slide. And this is a growth market in the US. Europe, obviously, we're a little, can you go back to this previous slide? We're obviously a little bit slower adapting CEA in North America than the Europeans have done, especially the Dutch, but we're getting there. Scalability, I put a question mark there because it remains to be seen how some of these operations can scale. Right now, there's a lot of jockeying. There's not a real market player in some of these smaller farms we've invested in. They are very small, niche-y, although some of them have aspirations to grow. What we'd ideally like to find on the sort of vertical farm space is somebody who figures out how to do it in a replicable, profitable manner, and then just kind of scales out, franchises out. We haven't seen that yet. Maybe that person's out there, but that's our goal, is to find one of these farms who's doing it right, and then have that person continue to scale and make everybody a lot of money. Next slide. All right. Here's some hard knock lessons learned that we've seen. Realistic construction timeline. Almost every project that we've seen, whether it's a small urban farm or a large scale high-tech greenhouse, has been over time and over budget. And not necessarily over budget, but obviously if you have if your actual startup takes longer than you think, you're burning through capital, you're burning through your runway, and you're going to end up hitting that next bullet there, which is a financing risk and undercapitalization. So this works both ways. And some of the big brand name CEA companies that you've seen bankruptcies or mass layoffs or closed down, I honestly believe they were overcapitalized. Venture Silicon Valley threw a lot of money at these firms, and they spent it without any regard to unit economics and profitability. They tried to take a VC approach to agriculture, which is, hey, we just need to scale it and continue to get financing rounds, but that's not really the way farming works. And to that bottom bullet, are you a farmer or are you a tech provider? Pick one. So we like to invest in one or the other. We are looking at some technologies and some tech providers in the CEA space that will be one-off investments. But on the other side, we're only going to invest in farms, production farms. So we like to see companies that are not trying to do both and please everybody. Climate control. Never underestimate how much it takes to control the environment inside one of these farms. So it's not just a temperature control. There's a lot of dehumidifiers that have to be running to make sure that you're not just melting everything inside the building because it's so wet and creating mold and things like that. So that, and of course the lighting system. So all that burns a lot of electricity. And into the next bullet, that those costs vary by locality. So whether you're talking about electrical cost, real estate cost, and labor cost, make sure that whatever you're investing in takes the locality into those into account on those cost variabilities. So, you know, some of these big firms tried to do massive indoor farms in Manhattan. Well, from a labor standpoint and a real estate standpoint, and probably an electricity standpoint, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So now they've ended up moving out to sort of suburban locations, and that is probably more viable than trying to do, you know, purely urban agriculture on a large scale. Selling, marketing, distribution challenges underappreciated. So that was covered in the previous presentation, but make sure that you have a team that's not just, you know, on the cultivation side. They actually there's somebody there that knows how to sell and market, understands the market they're selling into, especially if that's on the grocery side or the restaurant side or the wholesale distribution side. It's already been covered, but unit economics are key. So I don't care how much technology goes into a head of lettuce. If it costs, you know, $3 to produce and you can only sell it for 75 cents, you know, you're losing money. So don't do that. Make sure that the invest.
It looks like Chris is going to rejoin real quick. Thank you all for bearing with us. Apologies for the technical issues.
Hey, Steve, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Hey, I'm really sorry about that. So
No worries.
Power. I've been in this building 6 years and we've never lost power. So make sure that the people that you're investing in, the CEA has a backup supply, because you can lose crops very quickly if the power goes out, especially if you're in a temperate climate. So this is our platform. You know, we have a lot of investments besides CEA, but we do Reg D investments. If you're interested in and kind of learning about some of these CEAs, you can definitely apply or not. It's not apply, just register on the platform. It's free to register. Primarily, our investments are available to accredited investors, but we also have some that are available to non-accredited. So it's a CEA or it's a SEC exemption, Reg D exemption. And you know, one of the things that we pride ourselves in is being flexible and providing that alternative source of funding for these companies, these agribusinesses that are not able to get financing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Djavid touched on some of those, but you know, the main reasons we see is the ag system, finance system is optimized to do USDA guaranteed loans for large scale row crop, conventional row crop farmers. If you're doing anything besides that, it's much harder to secure funding. Private equity companies don't really understand this space. VCs really don't understand this space, made a lot of mistakes. So we're trying to get our expertise and working with partners like Agritecture to become one of the leading places where you can invest for a relatively small amount into these sorts of companies. Next slide, please. That's it. If you want to reach out to us, best place to find us is harvestreturns.com. You can shoot me an email, find us on the web, or give us a call. So with that, I'll turn it back over for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate that. Let's open it up to Q&A. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll use the next 10 minutes or so to answer any questions you may have. All right, we'll leave it open if anything comes to mind. You're so welcome, Melanie. Thank you for joining the session today. So the question is, where do you see companies engaged in building CEA automation solutions, core technology companies? So we see a lot of companies developing automation solutions for crop management. We see companies building CEA automation solutions for automated harvesting, crop indexing, which is moving crops through the greenhouse or vertical farm system, as well as automated washing, packaging. The idea here is to get a full seed to sale, no touch process. That's kind of what a lot of technology or cultivation technology developers shoot for. There are companies that have those process or those full systems built out, and you can select what aspects of automation you want included. But ultimately, those are kind of the core areas of CEA automation. CEA automation has been around for a while for various things like climate control. There's automated nutrient dosing systems that are relatively cheap and affordable on the market. But it's really the commercialization aspects of CEA that are being kind of focused on by larger cultivation system developers. Sarah, to answer your question, yes, we'll be sending this out to all the participants. We'll send that deck. So this next question, how much do you think CEA technology has improved upon greenhouses? So I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So CEA technology has improved a lot for both greenhouses and vertical farms. I would say probably the most rapid improvement has been in vertical farms, and that's due to the improvement in technologies such as LEDs. Over the past 10 to 15 years, LEDs have become much more efficient, which has driven down unit costs for vertical farms quite significantly. So I think that is why we've seen so much rapid growth and attention on vertical farms specifically, but there have been also significant technology improvements in greenhouses as well. There are greenhouses that produce very comparable, if not better, products than many vertical farms. And there are fully automated systems that are available for greenhouse leafy greens production. And that goes back to what I said before about that seed to sale, no touch process. There are systems out there that are doing that in greenhouses and vertical farms alike. So they're very comparable technology wise in terms of what they can achieve. Where they differ significantly is how much they cost. Vertical farms are significantly more expensive per unit of bed space than greenhouses. Vertical farms are usually in excess of $200 to $250 per square foot. We've seen them as high as $500 per square foot, and actually even higher than that. Whereas a high-tech greenhouse comes in around $75 per square foot. So that's kind of the major discrepancy we see. Of course, you're going to get higher density production in a vertical farm in terms of overall system footprint, but that may not matter in some markets. Most U.S. markets have relatively most dense, metropolitan U.S. markets have cheap land outside of them. So we see the rise of kind of the peri-urban greenhouse model as one that's very attractive and has produced very good unit economics for the companies engaged in that process. I hope that answered the question. If not, feel free to reiterate in the chat again in the Q&A section. Next question is, do you see CEAs partnering with CHP operations as a positive future market? Absolutely. Bruce, just because I mentioned that the CHP may have a higher carbon footprint than some US grids, and I make that point very clear because there are some very dirty regional grids that are, run off coal. But yes, we do see it as a positive future market. CHP is a great pairing for CEA when it comes to overall unit economics. It really significantly drops the cost of power, especially in markets where your grid power is expensive, but gas is cheap. Markets like New York, for example, they're right above the Marcellus Shale, and power is 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So there are market pockets where we see that working out really, really well. May not work everywhere, but I think it works well. Yes, CO2 capture. Once again, if you're using CO2 capture and feeding that to your plants, feeding CO2 to plants is not a permanent CO2 storage solution. That CO2 is going to be released either when that plant gets consumed or if it rots in some way. But soft biomass like plants are not permanent storage solutions. And if that gas was left in the ground, it would be more permanently stored than being brought up, combusted, and then fed to plants. So it looks like the questions are kind of slowing down a bit here. I'll stay on for the next 5 minutes or so in case any other come to mind. These are all great questions, by the way. Thank you. Oh, and Sarah just mentioned we'll be posting the recording of the session on our YouTube channel after the event. So yeah, just stay tuned and that will be available as well as the deck to anyone who's interested. And once again, if anybody has any questions for me directly, my email can be found in the slide deck. Let's go back here. It's just my first name, Djavid@agritecture.com. So if anybody wants to reach out and ask any additional questions that come to mind later, feel free to do that. Additionally, our due diligence service is a kind of a central service that we offer these days. So if any of you are looking at CEA operations, considering investing or becoming involved, and you're interested in a third-party opinion, either on the technology or any of the kind of categories that we discussed today, please feel free to reach out as well. We've become quite good at this, and we'd love to kind of impart any knowledge that we have onto you as you kind of enter the space or continue to be involved in this space. So once again, feel free to reach out. I'd love to answer any questions or provide feedback on opportunities that you guys are looking at. It looks like we've got about 3 more minutes and then we'll wrap things up. Going back to your point, Bruce, about CO2 capture in CHP, it's actually a very attractive economic kind of integration because a lot of greenhouse and CEA operators or vertical farm operators have to buy CO2 and store it on site. There is a lot of infrastructure that's required to store that CO2, and then it is an ongoing operational cost. So if you can get that from your CHP system, that is an attractive cost reduction method. So even though it may not be the most sustainable way to power your greenhouse, maybe not as sustainable as through wind power or co-located solar power, things along those lines, it is definitely a significant economic advantage because it reduces the cost of power overall from an OpEx perspective, as well as reduces cost for CO2. And greenhouses actually use much more CO2 than vertical farms in many cases because of the evaporative cooling systems. So when you're cooling evaporatively, you're exhausting a lot of the air from that greenhouse, and in that air comes the CO2 as well. So we see significantly more CO2 use on greenhouses. And then Chris, let's see. Yes, we have done due diligence on specific cultivation technologies for investors. We've done that many times. We can provide some very kind of sober feedback on the impact of those technologies, compare yield rates to kind of industry standard rates, and look at kind of nuanced design details of those. So if you're interested, please reach out and we can help you with that. Perfect. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, be sure to email that to me and we can even schedule a call to talk about it further. Okay, well, it looks like the questions have kind of trickled out. So thank you all for joining the presentation today. It was I thought a really great webinar. Thank you, Chris, for being such a really knowledgeable and informed guest, willing to share so much about what you guys do at Harvest Returns. And then thank you to all of the folks that ask questions as well. These are all great questions, and please feel free to reach out to either Chris or myself if you have any further questions about what we're up to. So thank you all today for joining this webinar. And I'll just quickly remind everyone that we have another webinar coming up on May 24th. This is our second webinar in the series, and this will be on policy guidelines for the future of urban agriculture. And it will be hosted by my colleagues, Jeffrey Landau and Brakely Bryant. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure it'll be a really interesting conversation. And once again, thank you all for joining today. Have a great day and a really wonderful week. Thank you.